Today is Monday, May 18th, 2026, and something happened yesterday morning that I genuinely did not expect to be writing about. Not because this war has been quiet, it has not been. Not because the ceasefire has been holding, it has not been doing that either. I expected another missile exchange, another Hormuz disruption, another drone swarm over a refinery. What I did not expect was a drone striking a nuclear power plant, not a military base, not an oil terminal, a nuclear power plant. The Arab world's first and only civilian nuclear power plant, the Barakah nuclear energy plant in Abu Dhabi's Al Dhafra region, sitting 225 kilometers west of the UAE capital, a facility that cost $20 billion to build and supplies roughly 25% of the entire UAE's electricity needs. That is the target that got hit yesterday morning. And the fact that we are still sitting here discussing ceasefire frameworks and diplomatic timelines after that happened is, frankly, extraordinary. Let me walk you through exactly what happened because the details matter enormously here. 3 drones entered UAE airspace from the western border on Sunday morning. 2 were successfully intercepted by air defense systems. The third made it through, struck an electrical generator located outside the inner perimeter of the plant, and set it on fire. The fire was brought under control. The IAEA confirmed a fire in the electrical generator and noted that one reactor temporarily relied on emergency diesel generators before normal systems were restored. All 4 units are now operating normally. UAE nuclear regulators confirmed that plant safety and essential systems were unaffected. No injuries. No radiation release. The reactors are intact. And yet if you think that means this is not a moment of historic significance, you are fundamentally misreading what just happened. Barakah generates roughly 40 terawatt-hours of clean electricity every year. It supplies power equivalent to the entire annual electricity demand of Switzerland. It avoids 22.4 million tons of carbon emissions annually. This is not a symbolic target. This is the backbone of the UAE's civilian energy infrastructure, built with South Korean KEPCO engineering, brought online in phases with the final unit completing commercial operations in 2024. Attacking this facility during a ceasefire does not just cross a military line. It crosses an international legal threshold that even active warring parties have historically respected. You do not attack nuclear power plants. The international framework built around that principle exists because the consequences of getting it wrong are not measured in casualties. They are measured in contamination zones spanning generations. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi responded immediately, expressing what he described as grave concern and stating that military activity threatening nuclear safety is unacceptable. That is not diplomatic boilerplate. That is the head of the United Nations nuclear watchdog issuing a public condemnation within hours. UAE Deputy Prime Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed strongly condemned what he called a treacherous terrorist attack, describing the targeting of peaceful nuclear energy facilities as a flagrant violation of international law. Qatar called it a blatant violation and said it crossed all red lines. The diplomatic language across the Gulf shifted dramatically within hours, and that shift tells you something important about where this conflict is now heading. Welcome to Dr. Nora Len. Today is May 18th, 2026. Subscribe right now and hit notifications because what happened yesterday at Barakah is not a one-day story. It is the opening act of the next phase of this conflict. In the parts ahead, I will walk you through the full military picture forming right now around Operation Project Freedom, what Iran actually still has in its arsenal, what the global bond market collapse means for the world economy, and what the next 72 hours could realistically look like for every party involved. Stay with me through all 5 parts because the picture only makes sense when you see it whole. Let us talk about what the United States military is actually doing right now, because the response to yesterday's Barakah strike is not starting from zero. The machinery was already in motion. Operation Project Freedom, the U.S. military's active campaign to restore freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, has been the operational backbone of American presence in this theater since May 4, 2026. And what happened yesterday just poured fuel on an engine that was already running very hot. Before the conflict, roughly 110 to 120 ships transited the Strait of Hormuz daily. That number collapsed to fewer than 10 daily movements, with some days recording 0 transits, reducing throughput to less than 10% of normal capacity. The disruption has affected approximately 2,000 vessels and around 20,000 seafarers. That is not a shipping inconvenience. That is a global energy and trade crisis being deliberately engineered by Tehran. Brent crude prices have exceeded $114 per barrel in May 2026, compared to approximately $71 on February 27, the day before the conflict began. Analysts are now projecting $150 to $200 per barrel if the strait remains closed for an extended period. Every day that Iran keeps that chokehold is another day the pressure on Washington to act decisively grows heavier. CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper described Project Freedom as a defensive operation deploying ballistic missile defense-capable destroyers, over 100 land and sea-based aircraft, multi-domain unmanned platforms operating under the sea, on the sea, and from the air, alongside 15,000 service members. That is a formidable force package. But here is what matters most in the context of yesterday's nuclear plant strike. The aircraft mix within that deployment tells you exactly what kind of escalation the United States military was already anticipating before the Baraka drone ever left its launch point. F-16CJ aircraft are among the platforms flying elevated combat air patrols over the Strait of Hormuz right now. The CJ variant is purpose-built for suppression of enemy air defenses, what military planners call SEAD. Its entire mission architecture is designed to locate, track, and destroy surface-to-air missile systems before strike packages go in. When you see the CJ variant flying elevated patrols over contested airspace, you are not looking at a defensive posture. You are watching the first phase of a strike chain being assembled in real time. Alongside those F-16s, the package includes F-15s, F-35s, and the EA-18G Growler, an electronic warfare aircraft designed to blind radar systems, jam communications, and suppress integrated air defense networks. Its presence in theater means the United States is already mapping every Iranian radar emission, every missile battery communication link, every command and control signal. That is preparation. That is not patrol. The RC-135 rivet joint, flying at 40,000 feet with a crew of approximately 35 signals intelligence specialists, is the central nervous system of the entire targeting picture. Every Shahd drone launch point, every surface-to-air missile radar that illuminates, every IRGC command frequency that goes active gets logged, classified, and fed into the targeting database. It builds the map that everything else follows. CENTCOM confirmed that U.S. forces have now redirected 81 commercial vessels and disabled 4 since the blockade against Iran began on April 13th. The blockade is not symbolic. It is a functioning economic stranglehold on Tehran, cutting off the oil revenue that funds the IRGC, that funds the drone program, that funds every shot that gets pointed at UAE territory. Now let us talk about what Iran still has in its arsenal, because dismissing what Tehran can bring to this fight would be a serious analytical error. This is not a broken military sending desperate final shots into the dark. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force has spent 4 decades engineering an asymmetric threat package specifically designed to bleed conventionally superior adversaries. They studied the United States military's doctrine, its strengths, and rather than try to match it, they built something designed to exploit the gaps in it. The centerpiece of Iran's current offensive capability is the Shahd 136 loitering munition. This is almost certainly the platform that struck the Baraka generator yesterday morning. It is a one-way kamikaze platform with a range estimated at approximately 1,000 nautical miles, carrying a 50-kilogram warhead, and designed to fly at low altitude to defeat radar coverage. Iran does not send one Shahd. It sends dozens simultaneously, forcing air defense systems to make rapid prioritization decisions under extreme operational pressure. Each intercept costs exponentially more than the drone itself. A Shahd 136 costs somewhere in the range of $25,000 per unit to produce. Intercepting it with an advanced surface-to-air missile costs multiples of that figure. At scale, across hundreds of launches, the mathematics of that exchange rate begins to hollow out the defender's inventory faster than it can be replenished. That economy of warfare calculus is why Tehran still has the ability to reach out and strike a nuclear power plant 225 kilometers inside UAE territory on a Sunday morning, even after U.S. forces struck more than 8,000 Iranian military targets, including 130 naval vessels, since the conflict began. The drone threat did not die when the Iranian Navy did. It dispersed. It went underground, into hardened launch facilities, into road mobile platforms, into decentralized launch teams that do not require a naval base or an airstrip or even a trained pilot to operate. On the ballistic missile side, the Fatih 110 series of road mobile precision platforms remains operational in Iranian inventory. The road mobile nature of these systems is what makes them so difficult to preemptively destroy. They move. They hide in tunnels, under bridges, in civilian infrastructure corridors. The RC-135 rivet joint and the targeting architecture around Project Freedom have been working methodically to map and track these platforms. But the geographic scale of Iran's territory and the decentralization of its launch capability means the targeting problem is never fully solved. You eliminate one battery and 3 more relocate before the next strike window opens. Here is the detail that most breaking news coverage has missed entirely. Iranian state-linked media specifically named Barakah among potential targets as far back as March 2026, citing it in response to U.S. actions near Karg Island. Yesterday's strike was not an improvised decision. It was planned, communicated in advance through state-adjacent channels as a threat, and then executed. Iran is not reacting randomly. It is executing a deliberate escalation ladder, each rung calculated to impose a cost that it believes the UAE and the United States are not yet politically prepared to pay in full. Hitting a nuclear power plant during a ceasefire is a rung on that ladder. It is designed to force a choice: absorb the strike and signal weakness, or respond with force and own the political consequences of breaking the ceasefire framework. Now let us zoom out to what the global economy is experiencing right now, because the Barakah strike did not happen in isolation from the broader financial system, and the bond market reaction to this weekend's escalation is one of the most important stories that is getting buried beneath the military headlines. Global bond markets tumbled on Sunday and into Monday as fears mounted that a war-driven surge in inflation will force central banks to raise interest rates. Yields spiked sharply higher as doubts increased about how quickly Middle East oil supplies can return to normal. Brent crude climbed to $111.20 per barrel on Monday morning, up more than 50% since the conflict began on February 28. Analysts at the National are now projecting that oil could reach $150 per barrel if the strait remains closed through June, with some models putting the ceiling at $200 if the closure extends into the third quarter. Think about what that trajectory means in practical terms. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve has been draining at a pace of 8.6 million barrels per week. Copper is retreating as the U.S.-Iran stalemate fuels inflation fear across industrial commodity markets. Stock markets worldwide that had recently climbed to record levels are now pulling back as the bond rout signals tightening financial conditions at precisely the moment when the global economy was hoping for easing. Inflation is climbing back toward levels not seen since 2023, and the Federal Reserve faces an extraordinarily difficult position: raise rates to fight war-driven inflation and risk tipping a slowing global economy into recession, or hold rates and watch purchasing power erode as energy costs compound through every sector simultaneously. Saudi Arabia intercepted 3 drones launched from Iraqi territory on Monday morning, confirming that the geographic scope of the drone campaign against Gulf infrastructure is not narrowing. It is widening. Iran-linked militant plots have been uncovered in the United States and Europe by the Department of Justice. The war is not staying in the Gulf. Its tentacles are reaching into financial systems, into energy supply chains, into the domestic security environments of countries thousands of kilometers from the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright, speaking on CBS Face the Nation, laid out Washington's stated endpoint with unusual clarity. He said the United States will have free flow of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz and an end to the Iranian nuclear program. He also confirmed that Iran holds nearly 1,000 pounds of uranium enriched to 60%, close to weapons grade, and far beyond any legitimate civilian use. That figure is the strategic subtext underneath every operational development in this conflict. The Barakah strike, the F-16CJ sorties, the carrier groups sitting offshore, all of it connects back to that number. The United States and Israel are not just fighting a war over the Strait of Hormuz. They are fighting a war to determine whether Iran crosses the nuclear threshold before the military option to stop it expires. If you are watching this and you want to follow every development in this story as it breaks, subscribe to Dr. Nora Len right now and hit that notification bell. This story is moving fast and we cover every dimension of it: the military, the economic, the diplomatic, and the human cost, with the depth and saucing it deserves. Hit subscribe before we go into the final part. Here is where everything lands. And I want you to sit with this carefully, because the picture that emerges when you connect every data point from this weekend is not ambiguous. Iran crossed a threshold yesterday that it cannot uncross. Attacking a nuclear power plant during a ceasefire, regardless of what the final attribution determination says, changes the political calculus for every party involved. It changes what the UAE can accept without responding. It changes what Washington can absorb without acting. It changes what Israel can tolerate without striking. And it changes the international community's tolerance for whatever Iran does next. The IAEA does not issue grave concern statements lightly. Qatar and every Gulf neighbor condemning the attack in the same news cycle is not a coincidence of diplomatic timing. It is a coalition hardening in real time. Trump is convening his national security team on Tuesday specifically to discuss military options. Two people familiar with the situation, including an Israeli military officer, confirmed that Israel and the United States are coordinating on a possible resumption of strikes, speaking on condition of anonymity because they were discussing confidential military preparations. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu told his cabinet on Sunday that Israel's eyes are open and that Israel is prepared for any scenario. When Israeli military officers are leaking coordination details with Washington on the same morning a nuclear plant gets hit, the message is deliberate. Someone wants Tehran to know that the window for de-escalation is closing and the clock is running faster than Iran's diplomatic calendar assumes. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, speaking at a summit in New Delhi on Friday, said Tehran cannot trust the Americans at all and described every day bringing a different message, sometimes two different messages in a single day, which deepens mistrust. He described the ceasefire as shaky and said Iran is only trying to maintain it to give diplomacy a chance. That was Friday. By Sunday morning, a drone was in the air toward Baraka. Those two things are not compatible with each other. A government that is genuinely trying to give diplomacy a chance does not simultaneously launch drones at nuclear facilities. What that contradiction tells you is that the factions inside Tehran that want escalation and the factions that want negotiation are not operating from the same script. And the factions that want escalation launched yesterday morning. The directed energy dimension of this story deserves attention because it is where the next phase of defensive investment is clearly heading. Yesterday's saturation approach, 3 drones, 2 intercepted, 1 through, is a template that air defense planners across the Gulf and in Washington are now urgently reassessing. The answer to drone swarm saturation is not more interceptor missiles alone. It is directed energy systems, high-powered microwave arrays capable of disabling multiple drones simultaneously without the per-shot cost of a surface-to-air missile, combined with AI-driven threat prioritization that makes targeting decisions faster than any human operator under pressure can match. When a drone gets through THAAD, Patriot, and every layer of defense simultaneously and hits a nuclear facility, the argument for these systems stops being theoretical and becomes the most urgent procurement conversation in every defense ministry watching. Here is the question I want to leave you with. If Iran is willing to hit a nuclear power plant while a ceasefire is nominally in place, while 15,000 U.S. personnel are deployed in theater, while 2 carrier strike groups sit offshore, while the IAEA Director General is publicly condemning the attack within hours, what exactly is Tehran saving for when the ceasefire formally collapses? What is the escalation above a nuclear power plant strike? That question does not have a comfortable answer. And the fact that the U.S. military response is already being shaped, the targeting intelligence being built, the strike packages being positioned, the carrier decks being loaded, tells you that Washington has been asking itself the same question, and does not plan to wait long for Tehran to provide the answer on its own terms. Subscribe to Dr. Nora Len right now and hit that notification bell. When Trump's national security team meets on Tuesday, when the UAE's attribution investigation concludes, when the next move comes from either Washington or Tehran, we will be here breaking it down with the sourcing and the depth this story demands. Drop your read on what happens next in the comments below. Because the question that matters most right now is this. Iran hit a nuclear plant during a ceasefire. What does the response look like? And is there still anyone in the room on either side with the authority and the will to stop what comes next?